بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So brothers and sisters, I hadn't really planned on delivering any further videos this Ramadan. However, I was prompted by somebody dear to me to actually put together some thoughts about rather than put together, but actually put a video together to share some thoughts about how we exit Ramadan. So for those of you who remember at the beginning of the month, we spoke somewhat about finding balance and setting intentions and creating habits. And I'd like to be able to refresh the process at the end of the month. However, today's talk is going to be more of a practical exercise. Inshallah, it should take, well, it may take about 10 minutes for this video, but you may need to revisit it and maybe spend up to half an hour doing the exercise to benefit fully, inshallah. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this fruitful and makes it a means to the acceptance of the month for all of us. Ameen. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slide. Share my slides. Let me find the presentation. Okay. New slideshow, and here we go. So this is a presentation on reflections on Ramadan, and as I've said, it's a practical exercise which makes a change from the usual sort of lecturing, and I'm hoping inshallah that it will be of benefit. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in many places in the Quran to reflect, and the word for that in Arabic is tafakkur. Really think about everything, think about ourselves, think about our lives, think about our worship, and see how we can gain this window inside ourselves, gain this lens to be able to know how to improve ourselves. So in Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if we so willed, we would have elevated him thereby, but he clung to the earth and followed his desires. So his example is like the example of a dog. If you attack him, he pants with his tongue protruding. And if you leave him alone, he still pants with his tongue protruding. That is the example of those who rejected our signs. So relate the Chronicles so that they may ponder. I've chosen this verse because although it seems a bit abstract, actually it's saying that, you know, the example of the dog is that whatever you do, the input, you know, produce the same output. So it leaves the dog basically lolling its tongue. And that's how most of us are living our lives, kind of almost on autopilot, just doing things on repeat, the same old. And how many of us would have had the same old Ramadan? You know, we started off perhaps with intentions, but what we ended up doing was defaulting to previous patterns. And so the likelihood is that if we put the same thing in, then after Ramadan, we're going to default to previous patterns too, which means that if we had set some goals, that they are less likely to be successful. And the only way that real change can happen is when we give it some time and some space and some mental energy, really to be able to start to create that change. And so this is an example of someone who's, you know, rejected the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to ponder. I found this really beautiful explanation of what the tafakkur is. This is by the Muslim chaplain at Duke University, and he has commented that the tafakkur is to think on a subject deeply, systematically, and in great detail. In the Islamic context, it signifies reflection, which is the human heart's light, spirit's nourishment, the essence of knowledge, and the heart and light of the Islamic way of life. Reflection is the light in the heart that allows the believer to discern what is good and evil, beneficial and harmful, beautiful and ugly. Again, it is through reflection that the universe becomes a book to read and study, and the verses of the Quran disclose their deeper meanings and secrets more clearly. Without reflection, the heart is darkened, the spirit is dysfunctional, and Islam is lived at such a superficial level that it is devoid of meaning and profundity. And I think this is what I'm trying to get to, really, is that our Ramadan should not be superficial, and it should not be devoid of meaning. And certainly we shouldn't come away without having reached this month and been blessed with it over this training period to, you know, come out exactly as we entered it. So how's it been for you? There are many, many tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us under the large bracket of the tafakkur that, you know, are supposed to help us really reflect on where things have been. One of these is tadabbur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَوَلَمْ تَدَبَّرُوا الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهُمْ. Do they not reflect on the Quran, as in contemplate it and not revise it, rehearse it, go back over it? Are there locks on their hearts? So we should be reflecting on the Quran. That's definitely one way of making tafakkur, reflecting on his science and the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us over and over again, use the word yaqulun, they not use their intellect. And then we have the tools of muraqabah, which is watching over ourselves, and muhasabah, taking ourselves to account. Sorry, I'm just going to pause the recording. Okay. Actually, I think we're okay. So that's the first thing. So how's it been? What are the levels of the inner chat, the internal discourse that happens in our minds all the time? You know, that worry, that anxiety. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he's made us anxious, but there's a solution to that. And that is that we turn to him with those anxieties. What is the level of noise, the background level of noise around us in our environment, in our heads, in our hearts, in our families? Do we feel a sense of sakina? And what about the level of ghafla? Have we gone through this month completely heedless, through autopilot, through rinsing and repeating, rinsing and repeating, rinsing and repeating, through simply existing and not experiencing or living or bringing life to our hearts? So I'm going to ask you to get a journal, and I would like you just to take a few moments. You're going to have to slow this down later. To go through this again, but I'd like to take you through the exercise. So if you can get a journal and a pen, and ideally not a scrap of paper, but a book that you're likely to go back and work with. And I just want you to take a moment to notice how you feel. So I suggest you do this in a room where you don't have the kind of background noise that I have right now with young children running around. But just take a moment to notice how you feel. How are you feeling right now? Are you feeling contented, happy, elated, excited? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling guilty? Are you feeling here's another Ramadan and it's more of the same old? Are you feeling nervous that perhaps there's been a deficiency in your deeds and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may or may not accept them? Do you feel you could have done better? So just take a moment to really find that feeling and notice it. And notice what it looks like, what it feels like, where it sits in your body. And how it sits in your body. Okay, that's great. And so once you've done that, the next question is why. You may not be able to answer this. Sometimes it's a logical explanation. Well, you know, I feel guilty because, you know, instead of reading Quran every day, I was watching Netflix in the time that I'd allocated. And so I didn't achieve my Ramadan goal. So sometimes it might be that straightforward, or that, you know, you still, you know, treated family members in the same way, you didn't make amends. So some things are really obvious. Sometimes you don't know though. So it's important just to see if you can find the feeling and then find the explanation to see what is driving that feeling, because that's important. Maybe somewhere where you have a locus of control and something you can modify. I also want you to think about, how do we measure or ascertain success? And I think this is a really important question, and we'll all have a personal answer to this. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us many dimensions of success, many definitions of success. For example, in Surah Al-Mu'mineen, he goes through various categories of qad aflaha al-mu'minun. So, you know, the mu'minun, the believers, have been successful. Alladhina hum fi salatin khashi'un, those who are humble in their prayers. And he goes through a list of criteria. However, I want to think specifically about Ramadan. How do we know in ourselves that we've been successful? Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who rewards, and the reward of fasting is with him alone, and the reward of patience is unlimited. And if we've been sincere and we've tried our best and we've been dedicated, we have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But ultimately, it comes down to his mercy and not our deeds, and not our reliance on our deeds. So it's important to remember that his mercy is very vast, and also that we still have time in the month to draw closer to him, because actions are judged in the way that they end, by their finishing. It's just like a, you know, you may have heard this analogy many times, but like a sprint in a race. You know, if you notice sprinters, they actually hasten up, they speed up right at the end. And this is how we need to end. We need to end on a high and not on a low, not deflated, but rather really elevated. Okay, I'm just going to move my little camera here. I want you to just take a moment to reflect on what went well. So what were the nafahat of the month from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to you? So nafahat are the gifts. What were those blessings? What were the special things that you noticed? They may have been spiritual things, for example, the ability to complete extra ibadah, have more tranquility in the heart, perhaps, social things, better relationships, perhaps gifts, perhaps shared iftars. There may be many, many things. And I want you to, we can never enumerate all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors, but I think trying to capture them is really helpful because it helps us to love and appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it'd be good to just reflect from that and make some observations about what were the nafahat, what were the special things that you observed this Ramadan. I know, alhamdulillah, in our household, there were many things that we observed, and I've made a list of those in my journal already. In fact, I've done this exercise before sharing it with you. And I would say that you really allow some time for that, because, it comes down to how do we preserve those favors. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you express gratitude, I shall certainly give you more. So he will certainly increase us. And in what we don't know, but it's important to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those favors, and also in order to preserve them, to see what it takes to maintain them and see what it takes to use them in his way. So that's really, really important, to keep those blessings alive and keep that gratitude alive. And just a moment to think about, what did you do differently to get these nafahat? Of course, the month is one full of mercy, and full of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors, with the shayateen chained up, etc. However, there are behaviors that we modify as well, and we try to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is it that you did differently that might have helped with some of these changes? Did you smile at somebody? Did you mend a relationship? Did you share some food with your neighbor? What were the things that you did? And this one is perhaps less positive, but equally important. What are some of the challenges that persisted for you through Ramadan? So sometimes we assume that when we go into Ramadan, we're going to have a highly elevated spiritual state. We can knock out all our bad habits for the month. There may not be things that are haram or strictly prohibited during the fast, but there may be things that we know are our vices. For example, checking our phones very frequently, being distracted, doom scrolling. I don't know, there may be many other things, taking an interest in things that aren't really that important, vain talk. So there may be many things, or still not contacting your family because you're used to living in a bubble, or maintaining a private space, which is no doubt important. So I'd like you to take a moment just to identify your biggest obstacles, the things that you didn't manage to overcome in Ramadan. And then we're going to break these down. So what were the relentless habits you could not kick despite the blessings of Ramadan? And just take a moment to note those down. And then I'd like you to, once you've done that, to identify the habits that have improved but risk relapse. So things that have got a bit better. For example, in Ramadan, outside of Ramadan, perhaps you're a bit erratic with your prayers, but in Ramadan you manage to pray 5 times a day, but after Eid the chances are that your prayers will start to lapse, or perhaps your Fajr prayer will lapse, or you stop doing the sunnahs. So there may be any number of habits that you have been able to work on, but the chances are that they are a little bit on shaky ground. And then identify those habits that have previously improved but have relapsed shortly after Ramadan. So those are the things that we see, for example, in many addicts. For example, smokers, they smoke and they quit and then they relapse, and the risk of relapse is often the earliest or the soonest within sort of the shortest period of quitting, so depending on what you're relapsing from. So that's why it's important to identify those triggers, because those are going to be harder things to improve. If they usually you tend to do them every year, and then you tend to fail, and you fail pretty soon afterwards. So I just want to bring these onto your radar, just to be aware of them. So we have clarity about our strengths and our weaknesses. Okay. So now we're going to think about how do we move on from one Ramadan to the next. So the next exercise is what we call a brain dumping exercise. And with all of this, I would always say that we need to always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance, clarity, and assistance. And there are many du'as for this. And the purpose of my talk is not really to go through the etiquette of du'a or the value of du'a or the timings for accepted du'a. This is really a process of a thought process and a journeying process that I'm taking you through. And I hope, inshallah, this beneficial knowledge can be combined with the teachings of our deen to be able to take us to the next level. I mean, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ghafir, وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And I entrust my affairs to Allah. Surely Allah is all seeing of all his servants. So this is really important. So that we can do all these exercises and we can have success and we can have failures or seeming failures. But we know that when we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is our partner. When we, have sincere intention, and when we feel the roads are blocked, he is our way, he is our path to achieving success and overcoming those obstacles. So the first brain dumping exercise we're going to do is, so we're going to try and set some goals. But before that, we're going to do these brain dumps, which is basically emptying out everything in your head and your heart into your journal. So we're going to look at category number 1, which is the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, we will be asked about giving Allah his rights and giving his creation their rights. So we'll start with the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he has prescribed fasting for us, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order that we may attain taqwa, which is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfilling the obligations and abstaining from the prohibitions. So we're going to talk about what acts of ibadah, would we like to really focus on? What have we found particularly beneficial this Ramadan? What have we done differently? What things have we started and not completed? For example, you might have started your Khatm al-Quran, you didn't quite complete it, so perhaps you want to continue that. So really thinking about which spiritual actions you want to continue and build upon throughout the year. And knowing that, to be able to do this, we need to make tawbah. We need to clear out our hearts, and we need to know that we may have had shortcomings during the month, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving. We just need to still turn to him with humbled hearts, raised hands and tears as much as we are able to. He is afoon. So, and we've been making this dua in the last 10 days. Allahumma innaka afoon tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. Allah, you are the one who loves to pardon. Okay, nagarafun. So remember that we start everything with seeking his forgiveness and asking for his help. So you might want to focus on your prayers, doing them on time, doing them with khushu', maybe working voluntary prayers, maybe night prayers, to identify what it is for you, or seeking knowledge, or voluntary fasting, or the fast of Shawwal, or giving charity more easily or more regularly or more secretly. Or focusing on Quran recitation, perhaps having a regular Quran habit, or focusing on tajweed or ulum al-Quran. That there may be many, many things that come into this. So just see where you are, what has worked for you in this month. What are you still working on? Where would you like to go? Okay, so the next slide is about the rights of creation. And that's going to start with the rights upon ourselves. And Allah, Prophet has taught us that your body has a right over you, your eyes have a right over you, and your wife has a right over you. So we're going to talk here about setting some goals for ourselves. So this is looking at the health of the mind, the body, and the soul. So it might include things like nutrition, health, eating habits, weight loss, exercise, meditation, sleep, hormones, just basic self-care. All of those things will come into giving your body its rights. Remember that the body's an amana, and we shouldn't treat it as a slave. It will speak up on the day of judgment if we've abused it, and we've got time to make things right, to right the wrongs, and to use our limbs for his service. Make sure they're exhausting them in the right way, not in the wrong things, chasing after dunya, and that we're nourishing them and taking care of them so that they can serve us for our lifetimes. So that's very important. So perhaps take a time to, brainstorm some health goals. And there may be something outside this list that I've given you. But, there may be a particular thing that you struggle with, migraines or, energy issues or menstrual issues or, skin issues. Remember, any of those things might be important. In fact, they're all important, and we can take care of them and improve them. Or it may be that you have a poor sleep routine, or that you stay up and you're on your phone till late, so the quality of your sleep is poor. So there can be many, many things. So try and put down some health goals. And then it doesn't matter how many goals you have at this stage. I just want you to put everything down from your head onto this journal. And the Prophet ﷺ taught his companions to make this dua. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afwa wal-afiyata fi dunya wal-akhirah. So, Allah, I ask you for forgiveness and well-being in this world and the hereafter. And this is a comprehensive dua that he would make twice a day. And it contains everything. It contains the forgiveness that we talked about in the first slide, on giving the rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also well-being in this world and the hereafter. And that it does encompass health, it encompasses the rights of the body, but I wanted to extract that as a separate category. So what is well-being? Afia. Afia includes a very wide definition of well-being. So that's things like protection, security, mental well-being, financial well-being, perhaps your work-life balance, perhaps a family holiday, so you've got time to connect with your family, friendships, positive social connections. All of these things will come under afia. These are things that keep us well, they keep us happy, they keep us healthy, they keep us secure. So again, it's a very vast category, and put down anything that comes into your mind. And this is the last slide on the brain dump. So this is about the rights of others upon you. So we did the rights upon ourselves, and we're still talking about rights of creation upon ourselves. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever is pleased to have his provision expanded and his lifespan extended, let him keep good relations with his family. And I think this hadith sums up everything. And we know there's a huge amount of medical evidence and studies that are in keeping with this. And if we were just to take the simple advice from the Prophet ﷺ, our lives would be transformed. And again, I'm going to break this down for you. So the first thing I would say is to check your character. Are there any gaps in your character? And we've all got them, because the Messenger of Allah was sent to perfect our character, which means that we can't have perfect character. We're all a work in progress, and that's why we have the blessing of Ramadan, where we practice greater patience and greater awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have perhaps better, more fragrant character. So that's important. And it might be something simple, it might be something as good as just smelling nice, or remembering to smile, or controlling your temper. So check your character, check your weaknesses and your flaws, and never think you've arrived because you haven't. And separate to characters, check your behavior. So we may have good character, but we may be triggered, or we may behave differently in different situations. So I would describe characters like the overall climate, whereas the behavior is like the weather, so how it changes on a day-to-day basis, depending on who you're around, where you are you tired and stressed after work? What are those things, what are those triggers that upset your behavior? And what can you do to modify those triggers? Because that then creates a win-win situation. If you know that you're always tired after a long shift on a Monday, and that makes you grumpy and snappy and distant from your family, perhaps change your working hours on a Monday, or perhaps have a watershed period when you come home just to yourself before you start connecting with your family, so you're able to deal with your family with good behavior. The next thing I would suggest is to check your relationships, and this should be in the order of priority. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, and of course we've been advised to implement birrul walidain, excellence and goodness towards our parents. So we should check whether we're honoring them, whether we're giving them the gift of time, and whether we can be of greater service to them. And then, you know, who are the people under your guardianship? So think about your spouse. What kind of character do you show your spouse? And Prophet said the best of you is the best of his wife or to his spouse. Look at your marriage. Is there work to be done there? What is the home atmosphere? Is it warm, loving, friendly, or is it very much asphyxiating, and one of fear and nervousness and detachment? And see how you can turn this around. And what are the priorities for yourselves and your families? What are your family goals? Think specifically about your children. What particular goals do you have for your children? What vision do you have for your children? Where do you want them to be when they grow up? How do you want them to be? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would you see them doing? Then after that, think about the other categories. So think about your extended family, again, starting with the blood ties, because they have rights over you. And again, this hadith is specifically about Silatul Rahim, so keeping the ties of the womb. And then think about your neighbors, your friends, and your colleagues. So this might include, you know, kindness in the wider community, social projects and enterprises. So I want you to take a moment, and I'm going to have to move this icon again. Oh. And just shut your eyes. So I want you to find a few moments of complete peace, to look inside your hearts, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely to show you the way, to find out what it is that you really need and what it is that you don't need to focus on right now, and to give you that clarity and that vision. And take as long as you need to do this. Okay. So as you've taken some moments out to do this, say you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show you the way, you know, make sure that your rizq is halal, your clothing is halal, your environment is halal, all those things that are important. Use these sort of special times to make dua, and particularly the last third of the night, iftar time, all those times that we have been blessed with. And you know, you can invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by his beautiful names. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. So for Allah, the most beautiful names, so call him by them. So use the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if you don't know them, memorize them and invoke salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we started this talk talking about gratitude, and I want to bring us back to that. I asked you to list the nafahat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon us during this month. To start by making abundant gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanking him for all his favors, count them, list them. I know that you can't list all of them, and ask him to preserve them and increase them for you, and to make you of his grateful slaves. And then I want you to go through that brain dump and identify 1 to 2 goals in each category of your brain dumping exercise. So I'm just going to remind you of what these were. So we looked at ibadah, health, well-being and rizq, character, family relationships such as parents, marriage and children, and wider relationships, which may include neighbors and community projects. You should distill out 5 to 7. The human brain isn't really able to cope with more than this, and make a sincere intention to commit to these over the next 12 months. And, you know, we end the month with seeking Allah's forgiveness, asking for his acceptance of our deeds, and with hope. And we start the new year again with Bismillah. Okay, inshallah, I hope that was a benefit. It was a lot longer than I'd expected, but please keep me in your du'as and keep my family in your du'as. And if there's any benefit, it's all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and any errors of my own. Assalamu alaikum.